From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on January 8th, 2026, in front of a live studio audience here at ETV. This is our first live taping of the year that features South Carolina Public Radio's Maayan Schechter and our special guest, House Speaker Murrell Smith, who previewed the 2026 legislative session. And we talked a lot about legislation that's going to be moving this year, what they want to see move through. But at the same time, we also got to know a little bit more about House Speaker Smith. And quite frankly, you're going to listen all the way through the podcast to find out what I'm talking about at the end. Don't skip to the end, listen to the whole thing, get some knowledge. But take it away, Studio Gavin. Welcome to the South Carolina Lede and this week in South Carolina crossover episode here at SCETV Studios in Columbia. I'm Gavin Jackson. Joining me along with this wonderful crowd for our 2026 legislative session preview is South Carolina Public Radio's Maayan Schechter and our special guest, House Speaker Murrell Smith of Sumter. Welcome to you both and welcome to our studio audience. How excited is everyone for the 2026 session? It's just like being in the House chamber, Speaker.
Not as rowdy.
We'll get there, right? That being said, Speaker Smith, thank you again for being with us. The House Republican Caucus rolled out its agenda in December. You guys had a press conference. We were there for that. Reiterate those priorities for us. Set the scene for this final year of the two-year session.
Yeah, in this legislative session, you're going to see us focus on three things. You're going to see us focus on taxes and tax reduction. You're going to see us focus on infrastructure and also public safety. Those have been three cornerstones that we have worked on this past session, and then we hopefully will lead with some new legislation on some tax reform. And obviously, you know, we have the infrastructure ad hoc committee that has been put together, and that they will be introducing a bill within the next week, I believe. And then we'll continue our focus on making South Carolina safe, and public safety has been a huge part of it, and we're going to continue to do that, especially concentrating on some juvenile crime issues. Unfortunately, what's happened is gangs and cartels have realized that juveniles don't have the same consequences as adults, and so they're using them to commit some of the crimes and commit some of the gang and drug trafficking that they have done. But more importantly, what I have seen over the years is the rise in violent crime by juveniles, and there's a number of ways we got to attack that. You got to attack it by giving wraparound services, by creating options and other things for them to do other than join the gangs and be involved in crime. But most importantly, there have to be consequences. And if you're going to commit adult violent crimes, then you're going to have to suffer the consequences of that. And so you'll see us really focus on that part first. And Brandon Cox, who from Berkeley County, put together a little committee within the last few weeks of 2025. And he is going to roll out this bill on the juvenile crime and then continue with other bills to follow. So you'll see a real focus on that.
Y'all did pass that smash and grab bill, right? Wasn't that
That's
last year?
The retail theft crime last year. We did that last year, as well as the fentanyl death bill. We passed in the anti-squatters bill in the House last year. So we've done a number of focused over the years on trying to make sure that South Carolinians can feel safe in their homes and feel safe in their communities.
I know one of the priorities that's not on your list is redistricting. We've talked about this, but I want to get you on it right now because it's the new year. We're starting off. There's still talk about this, not necessarily within your caucus, but with some members in the House. Mid-cycle redistricting, which is something that gained traction across the country at President Donald Trump's behest. We have 7 congressional districts in the state, 6 solid Republican, followed the last redrawing of the districts, and 1 solid Democrat. On Wednesday, Senate Republican leadership said that such redistricting is unlikely this session, though some in the House would like to see it. Would you agree with the Senate's summation of this?
I would agree with the Senate's summation of that, as well as what Governor McMaster has said. When you look at the districts, I think South Carolina was ahead of the curve. Because when we redistricted in 2020, you remember we had 2 Democrats and 5 Republicans. And we took Charleston, the 1st Congressional District, and made that where it would lean Republican, because at that point, the United States Supreme Court had said partisanship was not a prohibitive element under the Voting Rights Act. And we obviously were sued. We went to court, and I will give it the credit to the General Assembly is we lost in the trial court. We went up to the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. We lost there, and we took it all the way to the Supreme Court and won. They overturned. They held up our map, so we got a 6-to-1 advantage. And I think when you look at where you're going, the maps that I have seen and the numbers I have seen from the proposals still has a district that that leans heavily Democrat. And so I think what Senator Massey said was that we better be careful, because we could end up with a 5-2 or 4-3, and that would defeat the whole purpose of going through reapportionment.
How come that message isn't resonating enough, you think?
Because it's technical.
Yeah.
And, you know, people speak in sound bites, and those can be always juicy, but when you get into the details, you got to understand it. And that's part about being a politician and being a statesman. When you are governing and you're trying to lead the state and improve your state, you've got to get into the details and look at the consequences, what your obvious consequences and the unintended consequences.
Want to follow up on one of the priorities that I think probably everyone in this room and everyone in South Carolina talks about, and you've kind of previewed it, roads, infrastructure. Talking about that DOT modernization committee that you created that's been meeting over the past year, and like you said, we'll have a bill. We know that the bill is supposed to address policy and spending initiatives as it relates to infrastructure. What do you hope to see in this bill? What can South Carolinians expect to see?
Well, if you've been to Charleston, you've been to Greenville, and maybe even here in Columbia, you understand that congestion is real. And congestion is wasting people's time, and it's making it more difficult to get to your jobs, and it affects your quality of life. So we've got to do something about that. That's why I put together this committee, and you will see us focus on issues of trying to decongest the urban areas, and also continue on the rural safety plan and make sure most that our rural areas are paid attention to, so to speak, and that they are safe, because most deaths in the state occur in the rural areas. And so you have to put a focus on that in the roads, because those are the most dangerous roads, but you also have to deal with congestion. So what you'll see here is you're going to see first, it's going to be a 3-pronged attack. First, you got to deal with all these unnecessary regulations. And thank goodness we have President Trump in office, and his DOT secretary are doing great jobs of trying to reduce those impediments that cause the inflation and the cost of roads. And so, you know, one statistic that sticks out to me is that 2017 is when we passed the gas tax, and we raised the tax to 28 cents. 1 penny of that gas tax, 1 penny of 28 cents, paved 114 miles of roads in 2017. Now we're at 84. So that shows you the inflation that we've gone through in there. So we have to make sure that we reduce those regulations. We've got to make sure that we innovate, and when you innovate, you go to North Carolina, you go to Georgia, you go to South Carolina, you see that they have express lanes. And you know, we have, our statutes don't allow us to have those. And so we got to go and look at statutes where we're behind in other states and look at that, because people want to decide they want to pay a little bit more and go through these express lanes they can. And then lastly, we're going to have, you realize that that electric cars have one of the lowest tax rates in the state. We have to raise electric cars, and we got to realize that sooner or later that gas combustible cars are getting more fuel efficient. More people are buying electric cars. So we're going to have to find some ways that outside of the gas tax, that we're going to have to fund the infrastructure. And one thing, when I was Ways and Means Chairman in 2022, we put $125 million of state recurring revenue into that. We matched it in this what's called after August funds, and we were drawing down $250, $350, $400 million. And there are ways that we've got to innovate, and the state's going to have to put some resources into that.
And you mentioned regulations. DOT did say that they were cutting out a bunch of regulations this year. I did want to quickly ask you though, there's been, again, a lot of chatter about the fact that the state maintains so many of the roads here in South Carolina. Does any part of this legislation, should we expect any part of this legislation to allow the locals to perhaps control more of these roads, especially to get some of these roads paved much faster?
Well, absolutely. The answer is absolutely we'll do that. But when we did the 2017 legislation, we also allowed a road buyback. We would pay the locals to take the roads back, and there was very little interest in that. So, you're going to have to, it sounds great to get some money up front on the local arena, but they're going to realize that sooner or later they got to resurface and pave and maintain those roads, and there's not going to be money for that. And so, we're going to have to figure out a way that we can incentivize them. And I think Chairman Erickson and Co-Chairman Erickson and Heather Crawford have worked on that issue, and hopefully you're going to see something in that regard.
And Mr. Speaker, we'll talk about the funding in a second that you just touched on for infrastructure, but I want to talk about growth in general, because we were at the Senate press conference and there was a big conversation just about concerns about growth and keeping up with it. Obviously, it's a good thing to have in a sense, but there are concerns about, whether it's losing the culture, the identity of South Carolina, and also the concerns about congestion and infrastructure. Do you see any of the broader ways to address this outside of just infrastructure when it comes to growth? I mean, a lot of that is also made at the local level too. Do you see any changes there that can happen? I know home rule is also a big concern as well.
Well, you have home rule, and obviously that's a difficult nut to crack, because the way you can do it is maybe see some impact fees, and I think there will be some discussion of that when you see the road bill rolled out here in a week or so. But at the end of the day, people are coming here because we got one of the greatest states in the country, and as long as people are building houses and neighborhoods, it's tough for you to ban. You can't we got a constitutional right to travel. And so I couldn't agree with them more. It's changing the dynamics of South Carolina. It's changing the culture and the fabric of South Carolina. But, you also, you can't put your head in the sand and say, we're not going to do anything. You're going to have to be proactive, and you've got to continue to look and make investments that grow South Carolina and keep us a prosperous state.
And to that effect, we're talking about money and investments for the infrastructure. The governor in his budget, his proposal mentioned spending $1.1 billion in new money to expedite roads and interstate projects. This is on top of SCDOT's request for an additional $300 million, I think, to expedite bridge replacements. We're talking big money here. Do you see that being actually feasible when it comes to that amount of money going around?
Well, I think you've seen the state invest in the past and taken a lot of the surplus money and putting it into the roads in big numbers, $500 million. You remember a lot of the ARPA money that we did not have to use. The ARPA money, a lot of that went to roads and widening the interstates, and that has been, obviously it's slow, but it is it's going to really help with South Carolina. So I am a proponent of taking surplus money and putting it there at DOT. And for the last 2 years, we have given $200 million for the $1 billion bridge and repair in South Carolina. And so we'll continue to fund that in a manner to which the DOT can still work on those bridges and keep it in line with the construction of it. But I think that is a wise investment for South Carolina to put a lot of resources back into our roads.
Speaking of budget, as South Carolina grows, the demand on state services also grow, as you know, as especially former Ways and Means Chairman. What other big budget priorities do you expect to see this year?
Well, obviously infrastructure, as I talked about, and I think you'll continue to see our emphasis that we put on law enforcement and crime and making sure that South Carolina has the tools necessary to prosecute people who are committing crimes and to keep South Carolina safe. So you'll see a lot of investment in that. And again, I think the last thing that we don't get a lot of credit for, and when I first got elected, the biggest issue was education and teachers' pay. And I remember when we first got elected, our goal was to be at the Southeastern average. We are now leading, we're above the Southeastern average. And so we're going to fulfill Government Master's last promise to have a starting salary as a teacher in South Carolina of $50,000 and continue. Not only do we raise the starting salaries, but we raise the whole pay band of teachers. And we got to continue to focus that in that area to education, because that's the key to South Carolina. You have some workforce issues around South Carolina. We're working on them. I think we've made great improvements in that regard. But you have to have the next generation. So it's just not K through 12 high school. It is the colleges and universities, the technical colleges. And we've got to make sure that we're all going in the same direction, and we're trying to fill the needs of our employers in the state, because businesses flock into South Carolina. And we are in unprecedented success right now of how our economy is growing. We're the envy of the nation. And I'm telling you, we got to make sure not only deal with what's ahead of us for this next fiscal year, but what's ahead of us for the next 10 years, the next 20 years. And that's the way we plan. And I will say this as someone, I think the General Assembly and the governor and government in South Carolina ought to get some credit for the success, because it just didn't happen accidentally. It happened as a result of good policy and prudent management of your budgets and investing into South Carolina that led to these results.
Leslie, we know about some of the federal cuts that are coming in. I'm thinking particularly about how some agencies have been asking for money ahead of that, mainly the SNAP cuts. We know that there's been money requested to get ahead of some of the federal cost sharing difference that is going to happen. Do you have any concerns about the way that those cuts will have an impact on the state budget?
Well, they're obviously going to have impacts on the state budget if you wanted to backfill those. But in my opinion, these are promises from the federal government. They're not promises from the state government. And if the state government's going to backfill what promises that the federal government is pulling back, then that's an impossible task. So I don't think that's our obligation. Our obligation is to take care of South Carolina citizens, but we didn't create these programs. We didn't raise what's happening is the COVID era adjustments that were meant to be a short-term fix are now being pulled back. And so are we going to backfill that? I don't think there's enough money in the entire budget in South Carolina to backfill those. So, I think there's ways we're going to continue to try to work and be efficient and help. I mean, this is, you're looking, it's not SNAP, it's ABC vouchers, it is Medicaid. I mean, there's a lot ahead of us as we go, but we've got to, I think it's incumbent upon the government and the citizens of this state who want these programs to let their federal elected officials know the real consequences to them, because they're the ones that need to solve this problem, not the state.
Taxes was one of the priorities you spoke of, and right now we have enough money in the budget, recurring revenue, to trigger another 0.1% in the slow march in reducing income taxes in our state. So getting to zero has been a priority for a lot of people. It's also a big campaign talking point. Everyone's going to promise that we'll get to zero. How that happens is a bigger question that you guys are trying to address it. But how do you see that path get there? You guys passed legislation last year to the Senate. How does that benefit folks across the spectrum?
For the income tax reduction, affordability is the biggest issue in South Carolina and in this nation. And so how do you make South Carolina more affordable? You give people back the money that they earn and through their income taxes. So I think that's a big issue of why you would want to do that. And we passed a bill last year that raised that lower. We were at 6.1 last year. We're now at 6% for income tax. By the way, the highest in the Southeast. And we passed a bill last year that brought it down to 5.3%, and we're going to continue. Hopefully, the Senate will look at that bill and deal with that. And we're also going to have to deal with other taxes. Property taxes is another issue that's brewing out there where people. It's
always been an issue. How do you ever get to tackle it though? I mean, it seems like the Senate was talking about it too. I mean, that's such a hard one to crack.
It is a hard one to crack, but you've got to deal with your homeowners first, and people cannot get taxed out of their homes. And I always say this is people rush to Columbia to ask us to fix the property taxes that are voted on by the city and county councils, and why they don't hold their elected representatives accountable for that. That's a good question. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that citizens, especially the elderly, that are living in their homes and the taxes are going up, that at least that they can have some dignity and remain their last few remaining years be in that home. So you hopefully see some legislation on that. And the other one that I really want to see passed this year is the business personal property tax. Businesses, if you lease a copier, or you own a desk, you own a computer, the local government sends you a tax bill for it. And so, that's one way that we can control cost and have more affordability is by lessening those taxes on those personal property and then letting the businesses be able to not raise or even lower their rates, the things that they're producing right now.
Want to ask about a topic that a lot of people submitted, and that's energy. We saw y'all tackle that topic over this last year, but there's been a lot of concern and questions about the future of data centers, retail choice. What can we expect to see in this year on energy?
Well, we were ahead of the curve on energy, and we passed a sweeping energy bill last year that I think is going to be one of those pieces of legislation when you look back 20 years from now that we said this was monumental for South Carolina. And I want to tell everybody this, and I'll say this, is we are in an AI, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to embrace it. That is what's going to drive this economy over these next decade. And we're in an AI arms race with China. And I had the opportunity to go up to Washington, D.C. and work with legislative leaders with the administration. President Alexander and I went up there, and then we followed up having a virtual meeting with the Energy Secretary. And they are very proud of what we have done in South Carolina, and they want us to lean in because you have to create more generation. You have to create more generation to power our industries, to power our homes, our growing population, and data centers. And data centers is whether you like it or not, that is the railroads of the 1800s. That is the interstates of the 1950s. And this is a race that we have to win. This country has to win, and the Trump administration is leaning in on it and saying that we need to make sure that we have the fundamental infrastructure for the data center, for the AI. If you don't have it, then guess where it's going to go? It's going to be in China. And so South Carolina is going to be a willing partner with them on that, and we're going to lean in. And I think when we get restarting the VC Summer nuclear reactor, where the ratepayers are not at risk, nor are the taxpayers at risk, is going to be a real win for us in South Carolina. And as a result of that bill, you've seen Duke and Dominion both announced new combined cycle gas plants. And so these days of us being perilously close to brownouts and not being able to serve the citizens and the business in this state are going to be over with here soon.
I want to ask you about abortion because that's something we saw play on the off season over in the Senate. There was a bill, very restrictive, conservative, very restrictive bill that is stuck in the Senate right now. A subcommittee didn't advance to full committee. A member of your chamber and the Senate are holding a press conference for another restrictive bill next week that's going to have a hearing. Do you see any such legislation moving ahead? We have that 6-week ban on the books that's been upheld by the state Supreme Court. Is there any appetite for this?
Yeah, I think the one thing you're going to see move now is these mail-order abortion medications being prescribed by people out of state and being prescribed to citizens and having chemical abortion. So I think you will see us move in the House quickly on that bill. I think there's a hearing scheduled for next Thursday on that bill. And what that bill does is it regulates that medication on the drug schedules, and so someone cannot come and prescribe that out of state, and that's been a workaround that's happened, and you'll see that bill move quickly through the House.
I do want to ask just a quick question about just security, especially in light of what happened to the former speaker in Minnesota and another legislator. We know that legislatures all over the country are taking security measures much, much more seriously. What are you all doing in the House? You don't need to give us, obviously, the blueprints, but does it concern you at all?
So first and foremost, I'll say Melissa Hartman was a colleague of mine. She was speaker. I sat next to her the year before she was not speaker, sat right next to me in a conference, with our speakers conference we had, and that really brought it home. You know, that's something that's real. That's someone you know. And this is not an abstract theory. This is real life. People are being harmed in politics. And what's going on in the political culture in this country is broken, and it cannot continue to happen. So what I have done is I have made sure that the House has spent more money on security. When you come over to the Statehouse, you're going to see it's harder to get in there and harder to run amok in there. You will see new X-ray machines and you will see a lot more security in our building. And I'm not going to talk about the specific things that we have done, but my job as leader of the House is to protect my members. And I'm going to do everything I can to protect my members, because I hope nothing ever happens like that in our state. But you have to be prepared, and you have to make sure that you protect them. And I am absolutely committed to that, as well as President Alexander and the governor. And
that's great to hear, Mr. Speaker. We have less than a minute left, and I'm going to ask you one quick question. Hopefully, the governor, this is his last year. He's had a lot of legislative wins. Briefly talk about your relationship with him and what you want to see in a successor for the next governor.
Well, it's been an honor to work with Henry McMaster. He embodies what's good in South Carolina. He embodies what a politician should be in South Carolina. And it's been a pleasure working with him. And you look at the success, because he hasn't concerned himself about what political wins he can have. He's more concerned about what's best for South Carolina, and that's what's made him a great governor. And you've seen over the past year, we were the only state that had 3% growth, added 72,000 jobs to this state, and that's a result of his leadership. And we're one of 5 states last year that unemployment went down rather than going up. And so that's the collaborative approach he's taken. He has worked with us, and when I tell kids who want to be in politics, who do you want to emulate? I would tell them to emulate Henry McMaster. He governs by coordinating and communicating, his 3 C's, and collaborating. Thank you. I always tell me I forget one of those. But at the end of the day, I hope citizens of this state understand you can have a performance artist, or you can have somebody that just wants to come and attack and get likes on social media, or do you want a statesman, someone that wants to make South Carolina better and that cares about South Carolina more than they care about their political career?
Do you have an endorsement?
No, sir. I got to work with the winner.
That's House Speaker Murrell Smith and Maayan Schechter with South Carolina Public Radio. Thank you all for joining us, and happy session. We have a quick lightning round for the speaker before we see him off, and Maayan, you can go and kick it off.
Okay, speaking of football, college football, who's at the top? Who are you picking?
The Gamecocks.
There you go.
All right, good luck with that.
By 90.
Good answer.
Speaker, what's your best way to de-stress from the Statehouse and all 124 of your children there? 123, I should say.
Yeah, you include me and a child. My wife says I'm a grown child. To me, it's getting out in the woods, and it's getting out with my son or my daughter and going somewhere. And at the end of session, I don't get to spend a lot of time with my children, and I go off on a trip somewhere where it's us and their cell phones and their iPads and the gaming devices are left at home.
You don't look at your phone? You just get off the grid?
I get off the grid when I go. For anyone who wants to get a hold of me, that's what you got to believe.
All right, vacations. Best place to go on a vacation in and out of South Carolina. Where do you enjoy being? I love the mountains in South Carolina. I love mountains make me relax. I love the coast too, but that's great. And then if I had to go outside South Carolina, just go up one few miles and go up into the mountains up there. And I love Saluda, North Carolina, up there.
When you're in-state, folks that haven't been to Sumter, where would you recommend people go in Sumter if they're visiting for the first time?
Well, I had all my chairmen in Sumter this week, and everyone's impressed with Sumter County, and so they got the whole menu. I love the Sidebar. I love, which is downtown. Hampton's is one of the best restaurants in this state. I'll put that chef up against any chef in this state, in this country probably. And then you've got great places like the Poe House and Southern Bistro. So our food scene is vibrant in Sumter.
All right, this is a tough one. Every day you walk into the House chamber, you gavel everybody in, start the roll call, start the day. what would be your ideal walk-up song if the House could have one?
Big Pimpin'.
We'll be listening to that in our minds. Unexpected answer. That's what we live for. And the last question, Speaker, it's the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War. Do you have any favorite Revolutionary War heroes? I think there's only one answer if you're from Sumter.
The original Gamecock, Thomas Sumter.
There you go. Well, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time.
All right,
We'll see you
thank
on the
y'all for
floor.
having me.
A special thanks there to House Speaker Murrell Smith and South Carolina Public Radio's Maayan Schechter. You guys can watch that entire episode on youtube.com/@SCETV News. And thanks again for listening. Y'all show your appreciation by leaving us a review or a voicemail at 803-563-7169. Give us something to talk about in the wind down section. What would your walkout song be if you were the House Speaker? There are no wrong answers here. You can stay up to date with the latest news on SCETV.org and SouthCarolinaPublicRadio.org. And also don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lead is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lead, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.
I love it when Gavin talks.
Thank you, Gavin.
Gavin, thank you. I'm Gavin.
Hi, John. Hi, John.
Hello, John.
Hello, John.